laugh.
Morning, all of you. To get started with our next session, let me call upon the chief instructor, Dr. Arul Mozi Varman, who will take over the next session. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, fellow panelists. We have a really interesting list of speakers and an interesting list of topics. See, as we do cataract surgery, doing it in different situations or difficult situations gets to be far more challenging. And how do we overcome the challenges and give standard outcomes is going to be very important. So, of course, yes, nano-ophthalmos, as Srinivas is going to speak about, is extremely important. One of the most difficult surgeries is to do when in nano-ophthalmic eye, where you face a whole lot of a bunch of potential complications. And starting from IOL power calculation to the very procedure itself. Phakic IOLs, we're doing a whole lot of them, just like we're getting patients after LASIK surgery who are coming for cataract today, and the only issue there is calculation. With phakic IOL, it throws up a lot more challenges. How do we handle this? Atik is going to talk about phaco and colobomatous eyes, where it's not only the iris coloboma that's going to get in your way, lens coloboma, the zonular dehiscence, weakness, vitreous presenting, so many issues there. And uveitic post-uveitic cataract is a complete Pandora's box, starting from plastered iris, membrane on the cornea, over the lens, inability to do a rhexis because of calcification on the capsule, and of course for during and post-operative inflammations, and the posterior pole complications. How do we identify and handle all of those? Will be handled by Ramesh Dodarajan. And a lot more keratoplasties are being done. Thankfully, now we do more lamellar. And how do we handle post-keratoplasty eyes, where the issue starts with from calculations, and to also how do we do the surgery, how do we manage post-operative astigmatism there. And post-traumatic cataract is a completely different kettle of fish. The trauma can be of different kinds, from blunt trauma to opened up eye to a completely ruptured globe to any kind of issues. And that can be complicated with cataract. And how do we handle this? What Jayantan is going to speak. So we have a lot of interesting topics and wonderful speakers. I'll take the advantage and I'll go first because I have another talk and another session later on. So let me start my talk on phakic IOL with cataract. Can I share my screen? Yes, there we are. Okay. So cataract surgery after ICL. So a lot of issues. It throws up a lot of exciting possibilities, and you can have a lot of fun with this, these kind of cataracts. So we have been doing now ICLs for something like little over 15, almost 20 years. We started off with anterior chamber iris clip lenses and went quickly to the posterior chamber Colamma lenses. So most of the time we are now seeing these posterior chamber Colamma lenses. So I limit myself to those lenses. About the anterior iris clip lens, it's more open and shut. We'll have to just make a larger opening, take the lens out, maybe through the superior opening, and do a temporal clear corneal, do the surgery, put the lens in. So that's a different issue. So why does somebody get cataract after ICL? It just could be normal age related. You put it into somebody who was 25, 30 years old, it's almost 20 years now, and the person has got cataract. We all know that early occurrence of lens opacification in high myopia, almost every one of our patients who we put in an ICL is mostly due to high myopia, and they go for early nuclear sclerosis. Surgically induced trauma can also precipitate early cataract. ICL crystalline lens touch also can cause an anterior subcapsular cataract. This can occur due to, in the early part of the surgery itself, post-operative, it can be due to improperly sized lens, which can be found out by the space between the ICL and the crystalline lens. If it is very less, we'll have to do a lens exchange upfront. But now we also know one issue, that as the person ages, the crystalline lens gets thicker, and where you started off with a 500 or 600 micron space vault, it can keep reducing over the next 2 decades, and you can have an early ICL crystalline lens touch, and the cataract can start. Please remember, in very high powers, let's say something like -18 or -20, Though the ICL is thin in the center, it's thicker in the periphery. You could still be having a 500 micron vault in the center, but the vault in the periphery could be completely lost, and there could be a peripheral ICL lenticular touch, and the cataract starts in the periphery quite early and starts to progress centrally. So multiple reasons as to why cataract occurs after ICL. So if you get cataract or ICL, what are you going to do? You just have to do cataract surgery. So what are the difficulties? We all think the difficulties comes in IOL power calculation, and one assumes that the lens being, the ICL being there is going to give you some difficulties with the calculation. No, not at all. Lens is so thin, the thickness of the lens is somewhere about 400 microns, that its presence there does not matter whether you're going to measure the axial length by optical method or ultrasound method. It just don't have to put in any correction factor. So AL measurement is not an issue, but the issue comes from the fact that most of our patients for whom you put ICL either have high myopia and or have keratoconus, forme fruste, or proper keratoconus. So in this situation, you have to apply your mind as to how you normally play your mind for doing biometry in difficult situations, high myopia and keratoconus. The best would be to do SS-OCT, optical biometry, to get the best results. So how do you do the steps of surgery? Now I'm not going to expand on how you're going to do the K-wave measurements, how you're going to measure the keratoconus, is it central, is it paracentral, and what kind of a lens you're going to put in. All that is not going to be part of the talk. All that is part of the biometry issues. So use the standard protocol for biometry in keratoconus and eye myopia to get the most accurate lens calculation. You don't have to put any kind of correction factor for the presence of the ICL in the sulcus. So what do we do? You can skin the cat in many ways. Remove the ICL, then do cataract surgery. Cut and remove the ICL, then do cataract surgery. Do the cataract surgery, remove the ICL later. So if it's a Collamer lens, as we see here, it will come out through a 2.2 or a 2.4 very, very easily. Just enter in, put viscoelastic under the lens, float it up, dislodge the superior pole into the, surgical superior pole into the wound. Hand over hand technique, it just comes out. It's like falling off a log. Absolutely no issues. It's as easy as it looks, not at all difficult. You can get it out through a 2.4 millimeter incision. Do a standard phacoemulsification, no difficulties, as we do every time. And most of these cataracts come in quite early. So they are soft. There are, again, no great difficulties in doing the surgery. And you put in the appropriate lens. So believe me, where you are dealing with the Collamer lens, you have no issues. Removing the Collamer lens, that is the star ICL, is extremely easy. Just put viscoelastic in front of the lens, behind the lens, lift it up, bring out one pole into the wound, gently pull it out with a non-toothed forceps, hand over hand technique. It can be gently pulled out with no difficulty whatsoever. What happens that when you have the other group of lenses, the hydrophilic acrylic lenses, which are far more thick, and they're not going to come out through a 2.4. Now, if you enlarge the incision, how are you going to do the cataract after that? So here you have to preferably cut the lens. Steps of the surgery are the same. Viscoelastic in front and behind the lens. Bring the lens into the AC. Then you'll have to get yourself a simple micro varnish and cut the lens, or go for a proper pair of instruments, a holder and a lens cutter. There are lens cutters available which are made for cutting acrylic, hydrophilic or hydrophobic IOLs itself. These cutters work phenomenally, but believe me, you can very well get the same results with a micro varna itself. Cut the lens, you don't have to cut it fully. About 50% to 60% of the length of the lens, it is cut. And then you pull out one end, it folds over and it comes out. So again, no great difficulties. You're still left with a 2.4 millimeter incision. So your cataract surgery can proceed as it would normally. With no difference at all. Go back, fill up viscoelastic. Do your cataract surgery in the usual way. As I mentioned earlier, I think 9 out of 10, if not probably 95 out of 10 of these cataracts are soft. Because these are patients who are already very fixated upon clear vision without glasses. The moment they have any difficulty, they come to you. So now, placing the lens in the bag as usual. This is an interesting case where this patient had already had an ICL, a retinal detachment, and then had silicon oil. Then the silicon oil migrated into the anterior chamber, also developed cataract. The silicon oil had to be removed, and also the same sitting, we were planning a membranectomy. There was some membrane peeling on the retinal surface. It was a really complicated case. So here, it went another way. What you see there is the silicon oil in the anterior chamber. Okay, that's going to come out the moment you enter and do a small bit of IA, no issues at all. There you see the ICL behind that. We just will be surprised the fact that you can very well do a rhexis and a phacoemulsification without removing the ICL. You rotate it so you enter through the side part. So the vertical long axis of the lens has to be perpendicular to the incision. That's all. You just have to rotate it. And once you rotate it, you can go under. The rhexis can be done quite comfortably, believe me. It's not at all difficult. Any one of us can do that. Viscoelastic again. The lens is again rotated that side. So it's a long axis. I'm under the, it's sometimes difficult to discern that. The ICL is very much there. I've gone under, and being a soft cataract, we're able to take it out through a single-handed technique. You can stop, redo a bit of hydrodissection if you think that the lens is not coming out, but it's pretty easy. All of us can manage this. As I mentioned, most of these lenses are soft. You really don't get the grade 3, grade 4 hard cataracts, hopefully not. So out comes the lens. Do IA. You can even put in definitive lens. The lens has been inserted, and then you can take the lens out. Here I was not very particular about the incision. I made the incision larger and put in a suture. We can go the whole hog, and you can very well do flax in these cases. The flax instrument can be calibrated to do the rhexis. And once the rhexis is done, it's been also, the lens is being softened, even the soft lens. Take the nucleus of the ICL out just by the hand over hand technique and proceed. So you have got multiple choices. This was actually an image-guided surgery. The image-guided part was not recorded, unfortunately. So you recorded from a different instrument. So this was a toric, trifocal toric that went in to this patient's eye. So to sum it up, cataract surgery after ICL throws up a lot of interesting possibilities. You remove the lens, you cut the lens, or do the surgery with the lens in situ, or you can do also ICL and then do the rest of the thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Arun, for an amazing presentation with all the different ways of taking it out. I have a quick question for you before you go for your live surgery.
Yeah, no problem. I got a lot of time.
Arun, one quick question. Can you cut the lens ICL with the flax? Can you use a femto laser to cut it?
No, it will not. No, it just will not.
Okay.
So what you need to do when you do the OCT scanning on the flax machine, ensure that the OCT scan does not read the ICL as the anterior capsule. It can make that mistake, in which case the rhexis itself will not occur. Rhexis will occur on the lens, and it will just be a mark. It's occurred to me. So you have to ensure that the OCT is reading the anterior capsule accurately. If it is not, you can go and reset it. It's very simple. You can reset it and then proceed. It's not at all difficult, but no, the flax is not going to cut the lens. Believe me, the flax machine is not as strong as to cut a lens. No way, not yet.
Okay, thanks, Arun. Srinivas, can you start screen sharing, please?
Yes, sir.
Next,
morning,
we have a brilliant surgeon, a brilliant phaco-refractive surgeon, Dr. Srinivas G. Rao. He'll be talking to us on surgery in nano-ophthalmic eyes. He is one of the finest surgeons in the Agarwal group of hospitals and a keen speaker and a teacher, and he is presented in state, regional, and in international conferences.
Are you able to see my screen, sir?
Yes, Srinivas, very clear. Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Arul sir, Ramesh sir, and Dr. Atik for this opportunity. I'm going to talk on nano-ophthalmos, how to do phaco in a case of a nano-ophthalmos. First of all, we have to understand the disease. It's a micro-ophthalmos is a developmental disorder of the eye, characterized by the axial length reduction, at least in 2 standard deviations below the mean age. The micro-ophthalmos is always also associated with coloboma, anterior segment dysgenesis, lens abnormalities, and posterior segment abnormality. Nano-ophthalmos is a condition in which the eye is small, but as well as the function and the organization of the eye is very much normal. It's a small hyperopic eye. There are narrow palpebral fissures. It has a high hypermetropic refractive error. Remember, this has to be diagnosed early in the children where they can get refractive amblyopia. Glasses or a contact lens correction has to be done earlier in their age. And a shallow anterior chamber. Remember, the shallow anterior chamber is going to be difficult for the surgeon to do the phaco. The axial length up to 21 millimeter, the Duquesne classification. The posterior wall thickness is greater than 1.7. That is, the sclera is rigid and thick. There is a high lens, high volume ratio also. Classify it, I want you to understand this. Simple micro-ophthalmos, the axial length of the eye is less. That is, there is no other findings. Whereas in a case of a complex micro-ophthalmos, there is a short axial length. The eye globe size is reduced associated with other ocular malformations. In case of a relative anterior micro-ophthalmos, the anterior chamber dimensions are reduced, whereas the posterior segment dimension is normal with a normal sclera. Whereas in a case of a posterior micro-ophthalmos, there is a short axial length due to the posterior segment dimension with the normal anterior chamber dimensions, and the rest of things are normal. In nano-ophthalmos, there is short axial length is due to both small anterior as well as posterior segments. Here the sclera is thickened and the choroid is thickened with the normal lens volume. As you see, the white-to-white measurement is almost less in case of a micro-ophthalmos and nano-ophthalmos, whereas in the myopia, the axial length is both. The white-to-white may be normal, and in case of a megalocornea, both the white-to-white as well as the axial length is more than 27 millimeter mercury. Remembering the IOL formula is very important. Here, I want to mention that half a Q is a preferred one or high gaze, but more than that, we prefer an immersion technique in this, and it is better the surgeon perform the IOL calculation. Even the dipping of the cornea can produce increase the refractive surprise. Moreover, in spite of all the IOL masters, calculation, the formulas, everything, explain to the patient there can be refractive surprises. Later on, in case refractive surprises, piggyback lenses has to be kept in the sulcus. This has to be explained to the patient pre-operatively. The eye is small, both eyes are usually affected. Thickened sclera, patients develop glaucoma. Hypermetropia, this has to be corrected early in the childhood, otherwise lead to an amblyopia. Ametropic between the eyes. The amblyopia has to be taken care in the early in the stage. And patient develops strabismus, concomitant surgery has to be performed. Cataract surgery with a high power lens implant may be considered to have polypseudophakia with precipitating angle closure. Common complications are the posterior capsular rupture. PCR rates are more increased in these patients during surgery. 4 to 15% is not increase in the normal surgery. And there is aqueous misdirection. And suprachoroidal hemorrhage can happen. So always keep the eye, make a conjunctival incision, keep it ready to make further scleral incisions. Prolonged anterior UVTs are there, almost 2 to 11% increase in the normal patients. UV efficient is also there. Even in post-operatively, keep this in mind and follow these patients for UVTs. Corneal decompensation are known to occur, and even intraoperatively, as we are operating in a small eye, keep this in mind and protect your cornea well with both cohesive and viscoelastic dispersive. Retinal detachment, cystoid macular edema, choroidal hemorrhage, and vitreous hemorrhage are other complications. So with this surgery, planning the surgery is very essential. First and foremost, raise the saline bottle height to the ceiling. Preoperative mannitol or Diamox is given, and in such a way that the decompression of the vitreous is done, and the eye is made soft, because all these eyes are small eyes, are very tight and produce a severe posterior pressure while doing the surgery. Some of the authors have even suggested to give preoperative steroids to control the uveal uveitic reactions in the eye. Peripheral iridotomy, some of the authors also advised to do preoperatively as well as intraoperatively. Scleral ramular resections in case necessary. The basic idea is reduce the phaco time, minimizing the phaco time, keep a low phaco, low vacuum, and less damage to the cornea. I'd like to share my video. Are you able to see, sir?
No, sir.
And now, sir?
No, Srinivas. We are seeing your face, but not the video. You can play the video, go to screen share and click on on that window.
Yes, sir. Now, sir?
Yes, Srinivas, we can see.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I would like to thank Murali Ariga sir and M&A Hospital for this wonderful video. As you see, the axial length, corneal diameter is less, anterior chamber is less. It's very difficult to maneuver during surgery. Even though the lens size and thickness are very much normal in the size, it's going to be a very difficult surgery. Calculating the IOL power is also a difficult challenge. It's a 60-year-old male patient, the grade 2 NS2 cataract. The anterior chamber depth is 1.43 millimeter in this patient, and there is a narrow angle. As you see, the axial length is less than 21 millimeter. That is, the right eye is 15.4, and in the left eye it is 15.4 millimeter. All these things is going to be produced very difficult situations. I'm going to show two cases, both of the same eye. One done the pure phaco and the right eye, left eye, and the other one in the right eye differently. To start with the left eye, as you see, the white to white measurement which is taken, it's almost 10 millimeter, both horizontally and vertically. And as you see, it's a wide, mature, soft cataract. A conjunctival incision is made in case necessary later on for any suprachoroidal hemorrhage to make a subscleral incision. Side port entries are made in both the sides. Be very careful while doing side port entry. It should not be very large so that there cannot be any wound leak or an iris prolapse, which is very common in these surgeries. Even the main port entry, you have to be very careful that you make a 3-plane incision. The pupil is small. Here, the patient cannot afford, we are not using any rings. Small union rings can be tried. Iris hooks going to be very difficult in such a small situation in these small eye patients. Once a capsular excess is completed, a 2.8 millimeter keratome is a 3-plane tunnel is made, a clear corneal incision is made, and we use both cohesive and dispersive viscoelastics. This is a soft shell technique is followed to protect the endothelium. And we use a gentle multi-quadrant hydrodissection attempt. In here, not like in a regular phaco, use minimal fluid so that the iris doesn't collapse out. And the usual phaco is done. Here, as it is a soft cataract by God's grace, it is very simple. The capsular or the chop is done. In the back, the cataract is rotated and it is made into a multi-quadrant dissection. The usage of the left hand is very essential to perform this surgery, and never chop it in the back. Bring it to the center as a core point. Protect the endothelium. Don't keep an ego. Put a visco again if you want. Bring it to the center. Perform a supracapsular phaco. As it is a soft phaco, it is follow blood. Keep a low volume, low phaco power. And we are doing now a bimanual cortical aspiration. Here, remember the important point is go clockwise. Why I am mentioning clockwise is, as you cannot visualize fully and you cannot stretch the iris, sometimes you can contract. Go clockwise, you will not miss any cortex left out. You cannot visualize fully in all these small eyes. A custom-made 37 diopter IOL is placed. The IOL, you have to be very careful. Load yourself and inject very slowly, as it is a thick, bulky lens. Rotating the lens, we have found that many times we have produced capsular rent during this, as it's a bulky lens. Go very slow, gently, and do a small iridectomy 23, which is already preoperatively done, slightly extended, to prevent any postoperative rise in the intraocular pressure. Some of the authors don't agree this. Suture the wound in case necessary, if there is a wound leak, if you feel so, or adequate stromal adhesion is done. The other eye, as we face, I want to show in a different way. Some of the authors suggest that to decompress the vitreous by doing an anterior vitrectomy. So a trocar 23 gauge needle is introduced and thorough anterior vitrectomy is done. You also know this is also a soft mature cataract with the 3/60 vision. Some of the authors don't agree. because you don't see, don't do vitrectomy without seeing. That is their concept. But here we have attempted. This has been also published in the Tamil Nadu Journal of Ophthalmic Society. A thorough anterior vitrectomy design. The idea is to debulk the nucleus, the eye which was tight with a small narrow anterior chamber. After the thorough anterior vitrectomy, eyeball becomes very soft and the anterior chamber deepens. So you have an extra space. And in case those who are surgeons who are not very comfortable to do phaco, they can use the malunion rings, other rings, so the patient can afford it and do at the 2 side port incision. The routine phaco is performed. Here the patient is having a bit posterior synechiae. We use a stretcher to stretch the pupil, a normal blunt instrument, and the synechiae can be also relieved by doing the visco also. A thorough capsular rhexis, continuous capsular rhexis is done along with the pupillary margin so that you get a large rhexis to perform the phaco. A 2.8 mm keratome entry is made, 3-plane tunnel, you have to be very careful. A gentle, as I mentioned earlier, a gentle hydrodissection with minimal fluid. Don't use a heavy fluid so that the iris prolapse, once it starts, again, it's going to be a problem for you while doing intraoperatively. Phaco is the usual routine thing. Give a drench, stop and stop. Phaco is done. A soft shell phaco technique is followed. The cataract is, as it is very soft. It follows the probe. And we keep a low volume phaco with a low vacuum. And the epinucleus is also slowly being removed. Always remember that if you see the video, we don't move the phaco probe. We keep it in the center. That is the essential criteria. Don't take it anywhere to the edges so that the iris is not touched. And the 40 diopter, specifically tailor-made lens is placed. You yourself load the lens. Don't allow the sister to load. Sometimes because of bulky lenses, cannot move out of the injector. I have come across a patient where the injector burst open there and we could not have a second injector. We have to postpone the eye. And in a special case where the lens haptic we broke, I have also a case where I have produced a rent while rotating the lens. Some bulky lenses. Go very slowly. Each time, protect the endothelium with dispersive. When you're doing phaco, use the cohesive also. The peripheral iridectomy is done so that the post-operative rise in intraocular pressure is reduced. Now the trocar cannula is reduced. Remove. This is a pre-operative picture and the post-operative satisfactory patient. In case of non-orthos, certain points I want to stress. The challenges are many, but if you adequate planning and accurate diameter, you yourself do it, do an immersion contact, follow the formula, not the SRKTs don't generally work, use the Haggis or the Homoq, and phacoemulsification soft shell technique, protect the endothelium along with the dispersive as well as the cohesive, and phacoemulsification which is performed in the center, never take it to the probe to the periphery, careful injection and dialing of the lens. And anterior vitrectomy also is published to deepen the anterior chamber. Care to be taken to prevent supraocular hemorrhage. Post-operative also carefully follow up any rise in pressure, any uveitic reactions. I'd like to thank Ramesh sir and Arul sir for this wonderful opportunity, and Atik also.
Thanks
and
so much,
there are 6 steps. The 7th step I want to add, don't keep an ego. Refer it to senior surgeons if you're not comfortable doing this surgery, and be happy. Thank you, sir.
Srinivas, thank you, Srinivas. You made a very difficult surgery look very, very easy. In a master's hand, it always looks easy. Thank you so much, Srinivas. Next, I call upon Dr. Atik Sheikh, who will be talking about phaco in colpomatous eyes. Can you start screen sharing, please, Atik? Dr. Atik is a managing partner of Fatima Eye Clinic. He is an intellectual giant, always curious, always learning and teaching. And he did his fellowship in cataract and in refractive surgery. Thanks, Atik. Please start.
Thank you very much, Ramesh sir, for your wonderful introduction. Always a pleasure to be among this elite panel of speakers. Thank you, sir, and thanks, Arul sir, for this amazing opportunity. Well, I'm going to talk on phaco in colpomatous eyes. And here we are planning to stick to only congenital colpomas. The common ones that we usually see are the inferonasal iris colpomas. These are the ones which we usually see. Colpomas in other locations are very rare, and sometimes they can be associated with lens colpomas. These lens colpomas are not actually true colpomas. They happen due to zonular and ciliary body defect. And sometimes we will be able to see that there is a small notch in the lens, and usually it will be associated with absence of zonules in the colobomatous areas. So I have 6 pointers for phaco in colobomatous eyes. To begin with, the first point that I would like to emphasize is a proper preoperative assessment is very, very important in colobomatous patients. The reason being, the zonular integrity assessment is very important, which will help us to plan what sort of a support system we are planning to use for the case. And we have to counsel and ensure that the patient gets the cataract surgery done at the earliest. The reason being, already the capsule support system is less. And in case you have a hard cataract and you want to do a chop or a divide and conquer or a stop and chop, the amount of manipulation we will have to do inside the eye will be more. In case it is a soft cataract, things get much easy. The lens is less bulkier and it is far more easier to do. So counseling the patient for early intervention is very, very important in phaco in colobomatous eyes. So regarding the capsular support system, usually if there is about a 3 to 4 clock hour of capsular deficiency, we will be able to get reasonably good results with the capsular tension ring, which can be supported with the haptic of the IOL. If the defect is more than clock hours, it is better to use a capsular tension ring, a Sionese ring, or a CTS along with the CTR, which will give additional support. With this can be managed up to 6 clock hours. And if it is more than 6 clock hours, it is always better to have your PR surgeon backup and to do a scleral fixated lens. So choosing the support system is of prime importance. What sort of a ring you will want to use. This is an image of a simple capsular tension ring. This is a Sionese ring. It comes in 3 designs. Based on where the coloboma is, we can decide where the ring segment can be and where the support, maximum support is needed. So planning is very, very important for coloboma. This is a CTS, this is a segment support, which can again be used in addition to a CTR. Little bit of suturing is needed in these cases. Well, this was a patient which we operated. Patient has an inferonasal coloboma, and you can see here some amount of zonular support also is missing. This is about 3 clock hour of zonular support missing. Luckily, we were able to counsel the patient and get him to theater at a little early stage. This is not a hard cataract. The second point that I would like to tell is beginning the rhexis is very important. Rhexis in these cases with little bit of zonular deficiency or zonular support being absent is very difficult. So we should begin the rhexis where the support system is maximum, preferably more than about 180 degrees away from the area of zonular defect. In this case, we had an inferonasal defect. So it is always better to start the rhexis, bang opposite to it. And you can see here, this is the area where the defect is. So we started the rhexis here. You can see here, this is where we started and we were able to complete it easily. Instead, if you start here at the area of zonular defect, getting the tag is very difficult. Once you get it, you will be able to manage. But at this point, if we get stuck and the rhexis run away, then we are lost and getting the rhexis will be very difficult. So that is something that is very important. Once you get the rhexis, the third point I would like to tell is doing a hydro, we should be very, very, very cautious. We need to do gentle mini hydro dissection in multiple points and not look to get one full wave from end to end. And the site of doing the IA also is important. As you see here, the defect is here. We are trying to do a hydro here so that the wave can come up to here. You try to do a hydro in this quadrant, the wave will come here and cause more trauma to the zonules. So you should ensure that the wave also comes in some other quadrant other than the area of zonular defect. Mini hydro is always better. Do it slowly. In multiple quadrants can be done. This being a soft cataract, we did a hydro dissection, a gentle hydro dissection, as well as a delineation. This step is something which is very, very crucial. Before you start your phaco, it is better to do everything slowly. Maximum, we will be spending about 2 to 3 minutes more inside the eye, which is really worth it and will give brilliant results post-operatively. So start phaco slowly. Before you start your case, it is ideal to slightly lower your bottle height so that the iris turbulence is less lower your aspiration flow rate and your vacuum. Say, for example, you usually have a flow rate of about 40. I usually prefer to go down by about 20%, which will slow down your surgery about 20%, and you will be able to have more control. In other ways, even if something happens, we will be able to get away with it. Do a phaco slowly. This being a soft cataract, I didn't attempt a chop. Doing a stop and chop, slowly, gently do your phaco with slow parameters. You can see here the iris is trying to push itself and come out. After phaco is over, taking the probe out, again, we should be very cautious. This should be treated like a case with a posterior capsular rupture or a case with zonular dehiscence. If you pull the phaco probe out, there is a high chance that the anterior hyaloid face may be disrupted and vitreous may come through the colobomatous area. So inject viscoelastic and then pull the probe out. And beginning the IA also is very important. Like your rhexis, it is ideal to begin your IA at the area where we have maximum zonular support and do the IA at the point where there is zonular loss at that area last, so that you'll be able to visualize better and do the case much more comfortably. So injecting viscoelastic and pulling the probe out is of prime importance. IA, again, do with low parameters, not your usual parameters, at least 20% lesser. Hold the cortex, pull it to the center, and then aspirate. Do it slowly and gently. It is always okay to spend those extra few minutes rather than trying to be in a hurry. And then placement of CTR. There are several articles and talks on when and how to place the CTR. I personally feel comfortable placing the CTR as late as possible and as early as needed for that particular case. The reason being, visualization is quite difficult with a bulky nucleus in place. So I prefer to place a CTR after I finish my rhexis and my phaco. Because if you have the nucleus in place, getting the CTR into the bag itself is difficult. After we finish the IA, after we finish the hydro, it gets even more messy and visualizing is difficult. And I have personally have situations where I put the CTR in the sulcus and getting the CTR out is very, very difficult. In fact, close to impossible. You'll have to put another ring and there is a chance even the CTR may drop through the area of zonular weakness. So I prefer to place the CTR late. In this case also, with great precautions, we managed to do the IA, phaco, as well as the hydrodissection comfortably, and we placed the CTR quite late. This is what we learned from Aiki Ahmed's study also. Main advantage is visualization is much better and you're absolutely sure that you get the CTR into the bag. However, if you're not able to do your rhexis and the zonules are very loose, it can be placed earlier also, but you have to be very cautious and ensure that it goes exactly into the bag. And placing the haptic also can be done comfortably. In this case, you can see here that we are placing the CTR into the bag. It can be either injected or pushed into the eye. I'm more comfortable threading it into the eye and using a dialer. This has to be done slowly and not very fast because again, the CTR may go into the sulcus. So gently go into the bag and slowly drop the CTR into the eye. And placing the haptic can be positioned in such a way that that also adds on to the support of the capsular tension ring and gives more support. I'd like to thank AOS, Partha sir, and my mentor, Arulmozhi Varman sir, for this wonderful opportunity to talk on phaco in colobomatous eyes. Thank you very much for your patient listening.
Thanks, Atik. I found several interesting points in the surgery which you mentioned, including starting the capsular rhexis, where you have intact zonules, how to put the CTR right in the end, how not to extend the colobomatous rhexis, how to take precautions so that we don't have vitreous loss. Beautiful surgery, Atik. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, with your permission, I will start my talk on cataract in surgery in patients with uveitis and in seclusia pupillae. So this is supposed to be the rule of 6. If I have a seclusia pupillae, I will do a YAG iridotomy to deepen the chamber and see whether the peripheral chamber also becomes more deeper. The first rule is the indication for surgery is the same as indication for any other eye. When the vision is disturbed or when I feel that the part contributed by the cataract can be set right, I will do the surgery. In addition, cataract removal will help visualization of fundus details. Rule 2. Convention supported by a few case series says that we should control uveitis and wait for 3 months before cataract surgery. This is only convention. You don't have to follow this. You can operate at any time based on your judgment. For example, in intermediate uveitis and Fuchs heterochromic cyclitis, excellent results are obtained after cataract surgery without having a waiting period. Consider starting oral steroids 3 days before surgery and continuing for a period of 10 days. My personal preference, because of the extensive prevalence of diabetes in the South Indian population, I don't like giving oral steroids and I will give only periocular Kenacort. Rule 3, do not use silicone IOL. These patients may need a VR surgery and silicone oil injection in the future. PMMA and acrylic lenses are absolutely fine. Personally, I will never use an Acrosop material in a person with uveitis. The worst patient or worst glistenings and SSNG I ever seen was in a patient with uveitis, a 65-year-old lady. So this is a photograph of that particular person. You can see the severe whitening of the surface of the lens, which is subsurface nano glistening. You can also see extensive changes due to glistening in the body of the lens. Behind the lens, you can see an intact anterior hyaloid face here. This is not my personal opinion. There are many publications, including this one. If you want, you can look into the details. They had expanded these 5 lenses due to glistenings and SSNG. This first patient is a 29-year-old male who had an Alcon 3-piece implant done, who had loss of vision due to changes in the lens. So in uveitis, please avoid the Acrosop material. Rule number 4, please stain the capsule before injecting the OBD or it becomes difficult to stain it. So you'll have to put the dye beyond the area of posterior sinus case to stain the peripheral capsule. Please, you can dilate the pupil, you can use viscoelastics, or you can do a sphincterotomy, you can use iris hooks, or you can use a B-hex ring. This will depend on your personal preference and the state of the eye. Always implant the lens inside the bag, don't leave it in the sulcus to avoid uveal irritation. And very, very rarely, especially in patients with JRA, you may need to do a PCC and an anterior vitrectomy. And some surgeons prefer to leave patients with JRA and pediatric cataracts aphakic because of the very high incidence of scarring in these patients. So here we have a patient with a small pupil where the pupillary membrane is being removed. As the membrane is being removed, currently it is 1.5 times what it was when we started. You can use iris hooks or a Mulligan ring even without removing this membrane, but then the chances of destroying the pupillary sphincter is much more like that. When you're using iris hooks, please consider using 5 hooks instead of 4 hooks. We can very well do surgery through 3 hooks or even 4 hooks, but the area that is exposed is much larger for the same amount of distraction of the pupil if you use 5 hooks. This is a movie which was done about 10 years ago, and I'm putting a subincisional hook. So subincisional hook is very, very useful, especially when you have atrophy of the iris. This diagram shows how with 4 hooks we can do the surgery, but with 5 hooks, we get a much larger space. So if you use a subincisional hooks, both in intraocular floppy iris syndrome as well as in iris with tissue damage, you will not have a loss of uveal tissue outside the wound. Here is one more movie. I thank Dr. Pradeep Mohanto for this particular film. He removes a posterior synechiae with one simple sweep of a Simcoe cannula. The pupil is not fully dilated, is not adequately dilated for him. So he does multiple very small sphincterotomies. These sphincterotomies don't have to be large. He has used intracameral adrenaline as well as multiple small sphincterotomies. So these mini sphincterotomies, 4 or 5 in number, are enough to dilate the pupil to about 5 millimeters. And then he does a very safe surgery in this patient. Here is one more movie from Dr. Pradeep Mohanto. Here, he has posterior synechiae. The pupil is quite rigid, it's not dilating. He's attempting viscomydriasis, it has not helped. So he's going to insert a BHEX ring. So the insertion and removal becomes very simple if you have the customized BHEX forceps. This is the correct way to hold the BHEX ring. Insert the distal end, and once it's inside, you can tuck in the distal 1/3 easily, and then the remaining two parts. After you have tucked in, you'll get a 5 to 5.5 millimeter pupil through which surgery can be done. Go through the side port to tuck in the last leaflet of the BH ring. So BH ring will make it very easy and very quick, and you don't have to make the multiple incisions that you have to if you're going to put iris hooks. Then very rarely you may have to do a PCC in patients with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. These patients are not commonly seen by the private practitioner because big institutions generally manage these patients. You must use other immunomodulators in these patients. Steroid alone may not be enough. Also, please note, if you're having scleritis, don't make a sclerocorneal incision, but make a pure corneal incision. So although this looks difficult, it is actually very easy to do a PCC. And then you can go in with an IA probe and remove the viscoid which is there in the patella fossa. You won't lose vitreous. So rule number 5, you must give adequate and prolonged postoperative care. And minimum 8 weeks, you have to apply NSA drops in these patients. Rule 6, please expect excellent post-op results as long as the macula is normal. Before surgery, clearly inform the patient that uveitis is different, cataract is different. Treatment for uveitis will have to continue as before. Thank you. I think I have caught up a little bit, and I have saved some time for the next few speakers. We'll take questions in the end. The next speaker is Dr. Kumaran, or is it Dr. Jayantan?
So I think I'm next.
So next in the order is Dr. Kumaran Murugesan.
Yes,
he will speak to us on phaco post keratoplasty. Can you screen share, Dr. Kumaran?
Yes, sir. Can you see my screen, sir?
Yes, we can see your screen, Kumaran. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Dr. Kumaran is a director of Kumaran Eye Specialty Hospital in Chennai. He is also a master surgeon and a very wanted speaker, and he's an authority on NABH protocols. So not only is he an amazing phaco-refractive surgeon, he is also an authority on NABH. Thank you, Kumaran. Please.
Okay. So good morning. I hope my slides are visible and I'm quite audible. Please let me know if it is not.
Can you speak a little more loudly, Kumaran?
Yes, sir. Just a moment. I'll just increase my volume. So am I audible now, sir?
Yes, Kumaran. Thank you so much. Please proceed.
Sorry to interrupt, sir, but your screen is visible. However, this PPT is not visible.
No. So I have a video and then a PPT. So I'm going to play the videos outside the PPT.
Sure, sir. Sure. Sorry to disturb.
So good morning and a warm welcome to all. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Ramesh, Dr. Arulmozhi Varman, and all my co-speakers, including AIOs, for this wonderful opportunity. So my talk is on phaco in post-keratoplasty. As in any cataract surgery, nothing is over till you remove the clamp and patch the Balen's eye. So this is what exactly I'm going to tell you in this video. So this is a phacoemulsification post-lamellar keratoplasty. You could see a 360-degree synechiae which is being released here, shown here, and then following a capsulorhexis.
Sir, we are not seeing those videos, sir.
1 minute.
I think you let it come out of screen share and then click on the playing video, Kumaran.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So now you're seeing my screen, right?
I can see your face, Kumaran. Yes. You have started screen sharing.
Yes. Can you see this video being played now?
No, we can only see the 4 videos, the 3 videos on your screen.
Okay.
We can only see the icon.
Now?
No.
No, Kumaran, you play the video and you pause it, then come out of screen share and go and choose the playing video, Kumaran.
Okay.
The screen should not be there. Play the video and pause it. When you screen share, only the video should be playing.
Now?
Yes.
Yes,
you're right.
Kumran. Beautiful, beautiful. Arul, you'll take over. Arul, thank you so
No,
much.
no, no, you're there. You can keep doing.
So I hope my video is playing now.
Yes,
Yes.
you can see your
So
video.
this was a routine post-keratoplastic cataract surgery where visco has been injected and the cataract surgery is being performed, and it's with a textbook teaching. So the IOL is injected right into the bag without any problem, and the visco has been aspirated and everything goes on well. The wound has been hydrated, and there goes it. Can you see the Descemet membrane has been stripped while closing the side ports. So here comes the intraoperative OCT, where you could see the cleavage between at the graft host junction, where it's clearly separated. Luckily, the endothelium has not been stripped completely. So the intraoperative OCT really comes in play here, and now you have to really manage this Descemet membrane stripping. So you have to inject air into the anterior chamber, make sure that the stripping does not extend, and with the help of a 10-0 nylon, you see that the end of the needle goes right into the Descemet membrane and doesn't strip it further, and then you can anchor the Descemet membrane with these 10-0 nylon. So once this is done, you can further inject air into the anterior chamber, and you could see that the graft is completely sealed. So this is what I was trying to say. Nothing is over till the end of the surgery. So as in any other cataract surgery, yeah. So normally in any other cataract surgery, we decide to plan the surgery only a couple of days before. But in keratoplasty, it is not so. The preoperative assessment has to start at least 3 to 4 months before. Some of the features that has to be taken into account is a stable keratometry, the endothelial count, the corneal clarity, the type and size and location of the graft, all has to be taken into account. You have to have a stable keratometry. If you have done a penetrating keratoplasty, ensure that all the sutures are removed and you have a stable keratometry at least 3 months apart. Take 2 keratometries which are 3 months apart and ensure that they are stable before you plan your cataract surgery. The endothelial count, normally the endothelial count in these patients range somewhere between 700 to 1400, and if it is less, always counsel the patient for a simultaneous DSEC or a DMEC following phacoemulsification, because you would always damage the endothelium when the cell count is low. Look for the corneal clarity and make sure that you're able to perform the cataract surgery well and plan your incision. The type and size of graft is also important in these cases, because you need to plan where you have to place your incision, whether it has to be clear corneal in the host or a sclerocorneal. The other parameters which has to be looked into account are the axial length, the presence of posterior synechia, the nuclear density has to be assessed very importantly, because sometimes we're using higher phaco energy, you can also cause a zonular dialysis. The zonular integrity has to be checked before you go ahead with the cataract surgery. So as I told you earlier, suture removal, stable keratometry with at least 3 months apart, corneal clarity, specular microscopy. The type of keratoplasty is very important because you need to place your incision, the size of the graft and the position of the graft. Biometry, the optical biometry is the gold standard here. However, in denser cataracts, you can go for an immersion biometry. Use 3 mm zone of the corneal topography and don't go for the SIMK reading. Regular astigmatism, you can consider toric IOLs. It is always proved that the average astigmatism in a simultaneous cataract surgery following keratoplasty is around 7 diopters. So the challenge here is to always keep the astigmatism as less as possible. The IOL formula, use the latest generation IOL formulas, and be very careful when you use premium IOLs in these patients. When you have an irregular astigmatism, do not use your toric IOLs, and multifocals, I normally try to keep it apart. Zonular integrity and macular status is also important and has to be kept in place. The postoperative assessment is also important. Control inflammation, use long-term steroids, look for signs of graft rejection, and also control the comorbid conditions. Now let me go into the video. Yes, phaco in keratoplasty. So we have planned the keratoplasty, plan the phacoemulsification, and once we go into the intraoperative steps, always ensure that you have a posterior entry. The entry for any kind of incision in a post-keratoplasty should always be as posterior as possible, sometimes even limbal. Make sure you make all the entry only in the host and never in the graft. When you inject fluid into the anterior chamber, always see the tip of the cannula. Make sure you're right into the anterior chamber and then inject it. This is all to prevent the Descemet stripping, as I showed you in my first video. Always make the entry as posterior as possible. Direct your keratome right in the center of the nucleus. All these cases have a shallow anterior chamber, so it's very important that you keep the anterior chamber always deep by using copious amount of dispersive and coercive viscoelastic. Your aim should always be to protect the endothelium. While doing the rhexis, always use the tri-soft shell technique as described by Ashenov, which consists of a dispersive viscoelastic coating the endothelium, a coercive viscoelastic to maintain the anterior chamber, and always do the rhexis in the lake of BSS, which you inject beneath the coercive viscoelastic, because you'll find that it's always difficult to move the flap in a shallow anterior chamber in the presence of coercive viscoelastic. The tri-soft shell technique always gives you an additional leverage to do the rhexis easily. While doing the hydrodissection, also ensure you always see the tip go in the right plane beneath the capsule and direct the fluid. Never direct it above the capsule into the iris, where it could cause iris fluttering or even damage the endothelium. As I told you earlier, whatever instrument you take it into the anterior chamber, be very careful. Do not strip the corneal endothelium while putting your phaco into the anterior chamber. So this point talks about the entry. This is an eccentric size graft where you don't see the host at all. The graft goes till the limbus. So in these cases, you have to make a scleral corneal tunnel. So the bleeding is also a part of this. So make sure that you make a scleral incision. Going into the phaco techniques, this is the phaco in anterior lamellar thoracic keratoplasties. The main a point to be considered is the surge prevention. These eyes usually have a very shallow anterior chamber. Here comes the latest generation phaco machines, where you can maintain the anterior chamber by playing with your phaco settings. Use your phaco parameters as low as possible. Use copious amount of dispersive and coercive viscoelastics. In soft cases, it's quite easy. You just do a superficial phacoemulsification and you can aspirate the cortex quite easily, as shown here. While doing your IOL insertion, endothelial damage happens quite often, even in normal cases. So ensure that you enter the anterior chamber and insert the IOL right into the bag. The main aim is to prevent the endothelial damage. And while doing a hydrodissection, make sure that you do not strip the corneal endothelium here. So this is another cataract which is quite denser than the one I showed you before. The density is the one which dictates the power and the technique of your phacoemulsification. It is always good to perform the vertical or the horizontal chop, because you are going to use less amount of phaco power in an already compromised endothelium, which could be much safer. Divide the nucleus as much as possible into smaller fragments, because when you're going to bring these larger fragments into the anterior chamber, which is already shallow, you could have an endothelial touch which could compromise the clarity of the endothelium later on. So divide the nuclear fragment as small as possible, and then bring them in the iris plane and then emulsify. Always use the coercive viscoelastics to protect the endothelium. And once this is done, always make sure you aspirate all the cortex. Here you have put a scleral tunnel, so the ballowing of the conjunctiva is quite common. Use a 26 gauge cannula to take the fluid outside. And I told you earlier, make sure that you inject the IOL right into the bag, avoiding endothelial touch. Aspirate all the coercive viscoelastic in the anterior chamber, because you do not want to incite a postoperative graft rejections. Softer cataracts can be sometimes be challenging. They are not only hard cataracts are always difficult. Softer cataracts can also be difficult. Sometimes these softer cataracts do not divide easily. So in these cases, they, when you have a cheese wiring happening as shown here, try to reduce the size of the nucleus by gradually emulsifying the periphery, decrease the circumference of these nucleus, and finally you can just flip these nucleus into the chamber or in the iris plane and then emulsify them quite easily. So softer cataracts can also be difficult. So the take-home message is that irrespective of the cataract densities, you always be careful whenever you do a phaco in a post-keratoplastic case, and inject the IOL right inside the bag and always take care of the endothelium. Thank you.
Thank you, Kumar. That was excellent. You showed a lot of very interesting videos. Particularly, you highlighted the fact that you have to safeguard the endothelium, because often keratoplasties have been done for reasons of endothelial issues, except for the fact when you do it for keratoconus, when it's an anterior lamellar. So what would be the other issue? All of these patients would have unpredictable toricity. How do you think you would be handling those?
The main, see, earlier when PKPs were done, the open sky technique was being performed. But the main issue with simultaneous cataract and keratoplasty was the unavoidable high levels of astigmatism. The study shows that the astigmatism in simultaneous cataract surgery and keratoplasty was more than 7 to 8 diopters. With the main issue in challenging is the residual astigmatism, which has been occurring. So make sure that you remove all these sutures before you go ahead with the cataract, and and when you follow all these steps, the keratometry and the residual astigmatism can be somewhere around 4 to 5 diopters, sir.
No, the point is that most often these are keratoplasties done years ago.
Yes.
And the toricity is stable. So we should be thinking about going for toric lenses in these with a certain amount of accuracy. So
if you have a regular astigmatism, then you can go ahead with toric lenses. For irregular astigmatism, I don't think
very
it's
difficult.
a good choice.
Now, if it's an irregular astigmatism, can we do a combined procedure where we put the most optimal toric lens and do a top-up with a PRK? I'm opening the question to all the panelists. Please come on, Ramesh. We like to. Kumar, you answer first, and then.
Yes, I don't have any personal experience on that, because these eyes are normally the visual acuity is less, and if there's no comorbid conditions. See, we are dealing with eyes which have endothelial damage, low corneal clarity, and a lot of other problems. So probably you can try when your posterior segment and all the parameters are normal. Then it is okay, but doing a PRK on these normally compromised corneas, I'm not sure where to go about with that.
Ramesh?
From the refractive perspective, it is very much possible if you have a topo-linked laser, you can do a surface ablation. So one option is that when you're putting a toric lens in these patients, we should be aware that we are correcting a cornea which may not last for the lifetime of the patient, because if we do a regraft, then you would have to remove the whole toric lens which is scarred up, and that will become an issue. So put a toric lens only if you're sure that the cornea is going to last for the lifetime and it is stable. Surface ablation is possible. One more possibility is what Dr. John Davis shared in our group recently, is to put a pinhole intraocular lens as a piggyback lens, have a small pinhole, and the aberrations don't really matter. You can try that also.
Yeah, that's a good idea too.
Yes.
That's very nice. Thank you. Now we'll ask Jayandan to talk to us about phaco in traumatic cataracts.
Thank you so much, sir. Morning, everyone. My talk would be on the traumatic cataract. As we all know, generally, trauma has a huge spectrum to be discussed, right from the cornea to the retina. We'll just focus only on the traumatic cataract part. So the first rule is determine whether it's a blunt or penetrating trauma, because the management is going to be dependent on the nature of the injury. Especially when there is a low IOP, it says that there is an open glow. Even in a normal IOP, we need to check for the open wounds, because sealing of an open wound can lead to a normal IOP. And whenever there is a penetrating trauma, always make sure there is no means of indentation happening by means of either doing a immersion technique or so, because there could be a chance of extrusion of the content and chance of introducing infection into the eye. Systemic health of the patient is very important because an uncontrolled hypertension can lead to a suprachoroidal hemorrhage, and an uncontrolled diabetes can lead to a risk of infection postoperatively. The choice of anesthesia would be dependent upon the age of the patient, type of injury, comfort of the surgeon, and of course it can range from a topical to a general anesthesia. The most important point is antisepsis. Take utmost care to do the antiseptic protocol because these eyes are more prone for infection in the postoperative period. Okay, so when it comes to the cornea, always it is a must to have a sealed anterior chamber, especially when you're planning for a phacoemulsification. So leaking wound has to be sutured. It's better to suture the wound and take up for as a second procedure, phaco as a second procedure, because a leaky wound during the phacoemulsification will lead to collapse of the anterior chamber and inadvertent damage to the capsule and vitreous complication, which can lead to a late postoperative retinal complications. So in case if the cornea is not so clear enough to have a IOL calculation, you can depend on the other eye's calculation. The rule 3 is that check for the anterior capsule integrity and the zonular integrity. If the anterior capsule is not ruptured, it's a bless. Go ahead with the routine phacoemulsification, make a 6 mm rhexis and then routine phacoemulsification. Make sure not to damage the zonules, which is already weakened by the trauma. If the anterior capsule is ruptured, always stain with the trypan blue and see for the extent of the capsular rupture, and always make sure capsular rhexis has to be attended. Make sure the capsular tear is regularized and place the IOL in back. In case of zonular weakness and dialysis, if the zonular weakness is less than 3 cloacas, we can plan for a capsular tensioning. If it is more than 3 to 6 cloaca, a Sione ring can be implanted. Gross zonular weakness, definitely only a lensectomy and a secondary would be the choice, because in a traumatized eye, the bag is not going to get stabilized with any of the other measures. Cataract extraction depends whether it is purely a traumatic or a traumatic persona. In case of a penetrating injury, if the lens gets opacified immediately and loose fluffy cortex in the anterior chamber says that it's purely traumatic and it will be easy to aspirate. So doing a phacoemulsification, you can just go with the lower parameters. Rather than low parameters, I would say appropriate parameters. So depending on the eye's biometric status, we can decide on the surgery. Generally, we can go with a low bottle height to maintain the anterior chamber, enough to maintain the anterior chamber, a low vacuum of around 200 to 250, and a corresponding flow rate. Phaco, the power doesn't matter. You can use a pulse or a burst mode so that intermittently you can give whenever there is an occlusion at the phaco tip. Traumatic and a senile cataract, you need to go with the real parameters, what you're using for your senile cataracts. So whenever there is a complication that occurs either before the surgery or during the surgery, whenever there is a vitreous prolapse, always make sure the vitreous is completely removed from the anterior chamber. A thorough anterior vitrectomy has to be done, then proceed with your surgery. Otherwise, with the vitreous in anterior chamber, definitely a phacoemulsification is going to induce a retinal complication. Hyphema is more common because traumatized iris can lead to bleeding in the anterior chamber. So using a high molecular viscoelastic, aspirating the hyphema and putting a high molecular viscoelastic can reduce the chance of intraoperative bleeding. And whenever there is a preoperative hyphema, always make sure you check for the zonular iridodialysis. And if it is a gross dialysis, you need to go for a reparative procedure for that too. And coming to the choice of IOL, whenever there is a compromised view, never hesitate to defer the IOL implantation for a secondary procedure. And in case if the bag is intact, always make sure implant a single piece acrylic in the bag, because these traumatized eyes are prone for inflammation. So putting it in the sulcus may compromise the postoperative outcome. If the capsule is ruptured, can plan for a 3-piece acrylic IOL. The haptics in the sulcus and the IOL being captured into the capsule. If the zonules are compromised, as I said, we can plan for a CTS or a CTR, but it's always better if the view is not clear and the zonules are compromised, plan for a secondary IOL procedure. At any cost, try to avoid implanting an AC-IOL for these eyes. Right. We'll go on to the video. This is a first case. As you could see here, there is a corneal penetrating wound and a corresponding Sineque here. Always make sure that our capsule is stained with trypan blue. Once the capsule is adequately stained, after making the main incision, the Sineque is released. When you are releasing the Sineque, there are 2 main points to note. One is avoid bleeding from the iris. So in case if there is a bleeding, make sure you use a viscoelastic and then tamponade it, and make sure the capsule doesn't get damaged at this point. So once the Sineque lysis is done, make sure the capsular rhexis is started from the point from where the maximum capsular excess could be completed. So in case if a subincisional capsular excess was initiated, you can't even move 1 or 2 clockers. So that's the reason why it is started from the opposite quadrant. So as much as possible, the capsular excess has to be completed. And as you see here, once it reaches a subincisional part where there was a synovial lysis, there was a difficulty that encountered because of the calcification. So try to move slightly ahead of the calcification and then do the rhexis. And as you see here, the anterior and posterior capsule is actually fused at this point of injury. So here the point is we are going to complete the rhexis using a Van Ness scissors, and we are going to leave the anterior capsule that is fused to the posterior capsule at that point without leaving. So hydrodissection can be done gently only at the peripheral point, but it's better to be avoided. And now the whole of the nuclear material that is available can be collapsed into the anterior chamber, because doing a phacoemulsification in the bag is going to be very difficult. Under the protection of the viscoelastics, keeping the probe under the nuclear bit, you can use a carousel technique using only the vacuum, and a small pulse of phacoenergy can be given whenever there is an occlusion. Using the carousel technique, the nucleus can be actually emulsified completely. So once the nucleus gets completely emulsified, the key point is before removing the phaco probe out of the anterior chamber, inject viscoelastic through the side port and then remove the phaco probe out of the anterior chamber. So a bimanual irrigation aspiration can be done. The advantage is that the irrigation and aspiration are completely oppositely directed. So you can direct the irrigation away from the site of the rupture. And now it's a turn to remove the PC plaque. And in case if you don't remove the PC plaque, there's no point in doing the phaco at all. So you can use multimodality approach. You can use a needle. You can use a micro forceps, micro rhexis forceps, and a micro scissors. So the idea is to have a regularized posterior capsular rhexis. Yes, that comes is a posterior capsular rhexis. Once it is completed, we can remove the plaque out, and assessing the posterior support, we can inject the single piece acrylic IOL inside the capsular bag. As I mentioned, always make sure a single piece acrylic is implanted inside the capsular bag, because these eyes are more prone to inflammation. As you could see preoperatively, there was the Synechae, and this iris can again go back and attach to the lens. And whenever there is a Synechae formation postoperatively, the lens can decenter and all such complication can happen. So it's always better remove the place IOL in bag. Okay, so the next is, this is a case where you can see there is a rupture of the anterior capsule and there is loose cortex lying on in the anterior chamber. After through the side port, the anterior capsule is stained using the trypan blue, and even while forming the anterior chamber, you can see there is a loose cortex which is floating out. The anterior chamber is formed with viscoelastics. The anterior chamber, after entering, the rhexis was attempted. The point here to note is whenever there is a rupture of anterior capsule, you won't have a posterior support because the lens will be very loose, flappy. So you won't be able to have a clean support to make a capsular rhexis. So if it is adequate enough, you can just go ahead with your phacoemulsification before even the rhexis is attempted, because having a radial cuts can actually make more harm to the eye rather than doing the phacoemulsification with a ruptured capsule. So the key point is keep the phaco probe at the center, try to aspirate the disturbed nuclear and the cortical material staying at the center. Use your second as much as possible to bring the to the phaco probe. Make sure the anterior chamber doesn't collapse. The phaco parameter is going to be very critical here, because once it collapses, the anterior capsule and the posterior capsule can actually get damaged. Do a bimanual irrigation aspiration. During the aspiration, always make sure the cortex is caught, brought to the center, and then aspirated. Then reduce the chance of catching the anterior capsule and leading on to a dialysis. So once the irrigation aspiration is done, the posterior capsule seems to be completely intact. And as I mentioned, a single piece acrylic IOL is implanted inside the capsular bag. As you can see here, this is the center one is the corneal penetrating wound, and exactly adjacent to it was the capsular rupture here. So this can get opacified in the postoperative period and can compromise the visual axis. So we are going to extend that, and we are going to convert that into a proper curvilinear rhexis. So to the size of a pupil right now, we are going to actually extend the tape. And as you can see here, now the visual axis is better, and this could be appreciated in the postoperative period. So once the visco has to be aspirated, and at the end of the procedure, whenever there's a penetrating trauma, it's always better to actually inject the air bubble and see whether there is any further leak. In case if there is a further leak, you can suture it at the end of the procedure, and inject a antibiotic of choice into the intracameral. And finally, this is a post-operative picture. You can see that because of the rhexis being converted, you can see a quite clear visual axis. The patient was also happy. Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jayendran. That was very nice. You took us through all the difficulties, the possibilities that occur with traumatic cataract, right from an open globe to an old cold case where you can plan things better. Any questions from the panelists? Ramesh, you have anything to add or ask?
Arul, in the message section, I had some questions. I thought we all can take it.
Yes, please go ahead.
And I also want to agree totally with Srinivas G. Rao's comment. When you have a complex case and you're not able to manage, the beginning surgeon or the surgeon with a short experience, he should take the help of a mentor, or he should send it to a person who's more experienced. We should not manage very difficult case and then get into serious trouble.
Yes, perfectly right. Absolutely.
I have a question to Arul sir, if you permit me.
Yeah.
Sir, with regards to the ICL, it doesn't play much of a role when you do IOL power calculation, but the current generation acrylic lenses, when you do phaco, that is in case the patient develops a cataract, do they also don't play a role in affecting the biometry, sir?
Yes, they don't, because they're very thin. See, the average thickness of the central thickness of any ICL is around 500 microns. Even if it is going to be something like about 600 or 700 microns, which is the maximum, it's not going to alter because the amount of distance through which light travels to a different refractive medium is so short. Or it is sound. Light, also forget light. Light doesn't make a difference. Even with ultrasound, the distance that it travels through an altered refractive index is so short, it does not make any difference. Absolutely nothing at all. For it to make a difference, it has to be at least more than 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters thick. When you have something like a silicon-filled vitreous chamber, then it's almost about 10 millimeters or 12 millimeters of silicon through which it travels, and it alters it entirely. So here it is going to be sub 1 millimeter. It absolutely does not matter whether the material is polymer or is it hydrophilic acrylic. So you don't have to worry about that.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Atik, one more comment, Atik. Your question is very, very important. All the current generation optical biometers, they have one formula to convert the time taken for the interference reflection to come back. So they don't differentiate between cornea, AC, lens, and the vitreous chamber. So they don't fractionate each compartment. So the next generation of biometers will start doing that. Your question is actually very, very interesting. So to make our calculations more accurate, they're planning to fractionate each segment and assign a different speed of light for each segment. But the current generation biometers don't do that.
Ramesh, you had some questions on chat. Can you go to them and ask the questions? We have about 10 minutes more.
So I have a question to the panelists. So, so in myotic cataracts or whatever cause it may be, what is the preferred pupillary expanding devices would you prefer?
Can I go with the first answer and then I'll open it to others? Kumar, I think we have to accept that pupil expanding devices, sorry to say, they are becoming less and less necessary. If you can get a 3.5 to 4 millimeter pupil, you can do a very safe surgery because of the fluidics of the instruments that you have, better microscope you have, and the better viscoelastics you have. The choice is going to be between putting in hooks or putting in expansile device. There are only 3 modalities at this point. Hooks, the other one would be the Malyugin ring or the Bhattacharya ring. My choice, even today, is the first choice is hook, second choice is going to be Bhattacharya ring. The Malyugin, I've done very little. It's too expensive and it is not a great instrument in my opinion. Can I have somebody else's opinion there, please?
Kumaran, can you just repeat the question? My sound was low and I couldn't hear it.
What is the preferred pupillary expanding device you would like to use in case you decide to use one?
Yes, Kumaran. Kumaran, my opinion is in the last 4-5 years, I started to use hooks more and more. I stopped doing small pupil phaco. So my experience is different from Dr. Arul. And I believe that just expanding the pupil has decreased my complication rate immensely. See, not all of us are super gifted surgeons like Dr. Arul or Dr. Prema Padmanabhan or like Dr. Manju Kulkarni. Some people are very, very gifted surgeons. They can manage. For the average surgeon, I feel expanding the pupil alone makes your surgery very much safer. My preferred device is hooks because I'm used to that.
Okay.
And also I can reuse the hooks. It doesn't add to the cost. And after you do about 30-40 hooks, it doesn't really add to the time of surgery, maybe an extra 2 minutes. It doesn't take much time. I look forward to the opinion of Jayantan, Atik Sheth, and Srinivas Jiro also, please. And Kumaran, your own opinion.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, as much as possible, I try to manage without using hooks, sir. If needed, the only device that I use is hook. I've not had personal experience with BHEX as of now, sir. You've had any personal experience with BHEX, sir?
No, Atik, in the initial part of BHEX ring, there were so many reports of the iris root tearing out and about extensive dialysis and AC bleeds. So I was very scared to start. But currently, no, they have made it very simple. You have to get a BHEX ring with the BHEX injector. There is one proper way of doing this, and there are some nuances. So I think if you learn, it should become very easy. But I have not learned to use it. I've been scared to start because of the early problems. But currently, I think the new generation doctors should be willing to try out both. Cost is a factor. You can't reuse it. While with the hooks is much more cheaper.
What is the approximate cost of BHEX, sir?
I think a set is some 10,000. So you have to buy a set and it costs 10,000. You get some 10. Am I right?
No.
BHEX is not that expensive, sir. It is only 1,500 or less than that. Only thing you need to have an injector. I mean, the tool to which you have to put in the microforceps. So that is pretty expensive. It's a one-time investment.
But it is sold in a set of 10, in a pack of 10, isn't it?
No, so you can get a couple also.
Okay, so
Ramesh, that instrument that you use, that the forceps, microforceps, is a one-time investment that will last you many years. The unit itself is very inexpensive, sub 1,000 rupees.
So when I last asked, it was several years ago, Arul, I was offered that it will come as a pack and it will cost about 10,000, and they said
exactly. They were combining the instrument with 10 rings.
Okay.
That way, it doesn't mean you have to buy it every time. The instrument is bought only once.
Okay.
But you can inject the BHEX using a Sinskey hook also, but it is a little bit cumbersome. The microforceps would play well, sir. It will be easier to inject using the microforceps.
I think we all should not try it with our own way. We should do it the proper way. Get the correct instrument. Yes. Then we won't have complications. It will become simple.
True. Now, what about the others?
Sir, like Arul sir said, like definitely till 3.5 mm, definitely I'll go with the direct phacoemulsification without expansion. Two indications where I am worried is one, an intra-op meiosis, starting with 3.5 and pupil goes on smaller during the surgery as we are doing the phaco. One. Second is like a very small pupil of 1.5 2 mm, very meiotic pupils. These two situations only the hook works, and it's definitely a nightmare to use a BHEX or a Maligan in these small pupils. And intraoperatively, when you're doing the procedure, it's easy to use the hooks rather than the other expanding device. So I prefer hooks in these.
I have also used only hooks. My only question to the panelists is, how about this intracameral drugs? I don't have much experience. How it works? If in case meiosis develops intraoperatively, have any of you tried, sir?
Fantastic. It works very well. But you can't think it as a magic device. It can just maintain a certain amount of dilation. And intraoperatively, if one has traumatized the iris, stored it up, and then the whole thing is coming down, it's not going to be that useful. Yes, it has got its own use. But definitely, as Dr. Ramesh said, nothing like putting in a hook when you are in trouble or putting in an expansion device. I rely on...
Arul, I'll change it, Arul. Put in a hook, you won't get into trouble. This is what I have found out. Put
I
in
agree. I
hook.
agree.
You can avoid trouble.
Agreed. Absolutely. And putting in hooks is not very difficult. It's absolutely, falling off a log, not an issue at all. Not an issue at all. But just simple pupillary stretch, mechanical stretch, can handle most of our small pupils. Can. Ramesh doesn't accept. We have 2 minutes more. Anything else? If there are no other questions, thank all the panelists for a wonderful, fruitful discussion. So we'll plan ahead for the next conference and come up with an even better product for the next conference. Thank you so much, Ramesh. Thank you, Srinivas, Kumar, Jayantan.
Thank you, sir.
Arul, don't sign off a group photograph.
Sure. Yes, please. Go ahead. Tell the people. Can the hall authorities please take a group photograph?
Sure, I can do that, sir, for all of you.
Please,
So I request you all to smile.
Yes, we are.
All right, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. We'll sign off.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Tatik. Thanks, Arul. Thanks, Jayantan. Thanks, Srinivas. Thanks, Kumaran. Thank you.